My guardians called me a selfish betrayer and threw juice in my face at a family gathering, all because I wouldn't hand over my $240,000 bakery to their precious favorite. I stood up and made a move they never anticipated. I, 28M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, still processing what happened at last weekend's family gathering. The juice is still metaphorically dripping from my face, and honestly, I'm not sure if I should feel vindicated or terrified by what I've set in motion. Let me back up. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16. My aunt and uncle took me in, and I'll give them credit. They fed me, housed me, and got me through high school. But there was always this underlying current that I was the charity case, the burden they graciously accepted while their own daughter was the golden child who could do no wrong. Their daughter is 2 years younger than me, and from day one, everything revolved around her needs, her dreams, her future. When I graduated high school, they made it clear that college wasn't in the budget for me, but somehow they'd been saving for her education since she was born. Fair enough, I thought. I wasn't their biological kid. So I worked. I took a job at a local bakery, started at minimum wage, learned everything I could. The owner was this elderly woman who saw something in me, taught me not just how to bake, but how to run a business. When she decided to retire 5 years ago, she offered to sell me the bakery at a price I could actually afford with a payment plan. It was my chance, and I took it. Those 5 years have been brutal. 16-hour days, sleeping in the back office some nights, reinvesting every penny back into the business. But it worked. The bakery is now worth around $240,000, completely paid off, and turning a solid profit. I've built something from nothing. Meanwhile, my cousin graduated with a degree in business management and has been bouncing between entry-level jobs, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. According to my aunt and uncle, it's because she's too creative for corporate environments and needs something that speaks to her artistic soul. 3 months ago, my uncle approached me with what he called a family proposal. He explained that their daughter had always dreamed of owning a bakery, that it would be perfect for her creative spirit, and that since I was family, I should consider transferring ownership to her. Not selling, transferring. Because family takes care of family. I told him I'd think about it, mainly to buy time and avoid a confrontation. But the requests became more frequent, more insistent. My aunt started dropping hints about how I owed them for taking me in, how this would be a way to give back to the family that saved me. The breaking point came at last weekend's gathering. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. About an hour into the barbecue, my uncle stood up and made an announcement that caught me completely off guard. He told everyone that I had graciously decided to hand over my bakery to their daughter, that it was a beautiful gesture of gratitude and family loyalty. The room erupted in congratulations and praise for my generosity. My cousin was practically glowing, already making plans about renovations and new menu items. I sat there, stunned. They had just publicly committed me to something I'd never agreed to. When I finally found my voice and said there had been a misunderstanding, that I hadn't agreed to anything, the mood shifted instantly. My aunt's face went red. She told me I was being selfish and ungrateful. She reminded me of everything they'd done for me, how they'd sacrificed for me when no one else would. My uncle chimed in, saying I was betraying the family that raised me, that I was choosing money over blood. But it was my cousin's reaction that really got to me. She started crying, saying she'd already quit her job because she thought she'd be taking over the bakery next month. She'd told her friends, made plans, even put a deposit down on a new apartment closer to the bakery. The family turned on me like a pack of wolves. Suddenly, I was the villain who had crushed an innocent girl's dreams. My grandmother, who I'd always been close to, looked at me with such disappointment that it physically hurt. That's when my aunt grabbed her glass of orange juice and threw it directly in my face. The cold liquid dripped down my shirt as she called me a selfish betrayer who didn't deserve the family name. I stood up, juice still dripping, and told them exactly what I thought. I explained how I'd worked my ass off for everything I had, how I'd built that bakery from nothing while their precious daughter was partying through college on their dime. I told them that taking me in didn't entitle them to my life's work, and that if they wanted a bakery so badly, they could buy one for their daughter with their own money. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my uncle told me I was no longer welcome in their home, that I'd shown my true colors, and that I was dead to them. I left that gathering knowing I'd burned every bridge with the only family I had left. But I also left with a plan forming in my mind, one that would make them regret ever trying to manipulate me. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the family gathering, and I've been busy. Very busy. First, I did some digging into my parents' estate. When they died, my aunt and uncle became my guardians and managed my inheritance until I turned 18. I'd always assumed there wasn't much, They told me my parents had some debts and that most of the money went to funeral costs and settling affairs. But something my uncle said at the gathering stuck with me. He'd mentioned how they'd sacrificed for me, but I remembered them buying a new car shortly after I moved in and taking several vacations that seemed expensive for people who were supposedly struggling to support an extra kid. I hired a lawyer and requested all the documentation from my parents' estate. What I found made my blood boil. My parents had a life insurance policy worth $150,000. They owned their house outright, which sold for $180,000. They had savings accounts totaling another $45,000. After funeral costs and debts, there should have been around $320,000 held in trust for me. According to the documents, my aunt and uncle had been appointed as trustees with broad discretionary powers over the funds for my care and education. They'd systematically drained the account over the 2 years I lived with them. New car, home renovations, family vacations, and a substantial education fund for their daughter, all justified as expenses related to my care. By the time I turned 18, there was less than $3,000 left, which they handed over with some story about how expensive it had been to raise me. They'd stolen over $300,000 from me. Money that could have paid for college, that could have given me a real head start in life instead of forcing me to work my way up from nothing. But here's the thing. The statute of limitations hadn't run out, and my lawyer was very interested in the case. Update 2. The lawsuit hit them like a freight train. I sued for the full amount plus interest and damages, which brought the total to just over $400,000. My lawyer was confident we had a strong case. The documentation was clear, and their use of the funds was obviously outside the scope of legitimate expenses for my care. But I wasn't done. While researching my parents' estate, I'd also looked into my aunt and uncle's finances. Turns out they'd been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes for years after I'd moved out and become financially independent. Tax fraud is a serious crime, and the IRS was very interested when I provided them with documentation. I also discovered that my uncle's business had received several COVID relief loans that he may not have been entitled to. A quick tip to the relevant authorities got that investigation started too. But the real masterstroke came when I found out that their daughter, the one who was supposed to be so creative and artistic, had been collecting unemployment benefits while working under-the-table jobs. Another quick call to the state unemployment office got that ball rolling. Within a month, my aunt and uncle were dealing with a civil lawsuit, an IRS investigation, a federal investigation into loan fraud, and their daughter was facing unemployment fraud charges. The family that had called me selfish and ungrateful was about to learn what real consequences looked like. Update 3. 6 months later, and the dominoes are still falling. The civil lawsuit settled out of court. My aunt and uncle's lawyer advised them to settle rather than face a trial they couldn't win. They had to liquidate assets to pay me, including taking out a second mortgage on their house. I got my $400,000, plus my legal fees covered. The IRS investigation resulted in substantial penalties and back taxes owed. The COVID loan fraud investigation led to criminal charges for my uncle. He's looking at potential jail time and definitely has to pay back the loans with penalties. Their daughter pleaded guilty to unemployment fraud and got probation, but she had to pay back everything she'd illegally collected plus fines. But the most satisfying part? The family that had turned on me so quickly started reaching out once word got around about what my aunt and uncle had done. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hear my side of the story. The narrative shifted from me being the ungrateful nephew to me being the victim who'd been robbed by his own guardians. My grandmother, who had looked at me with such disappointment at that gathering, called me in tears to apologize. She'd had no idea what my aunt and uncle had done with my inheritance. Other family members started sharing their own stories about my aunt and uncle's questionable behavior over the years. The golden child cousin who was supposed to get my bakery? She moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford her own place anymore. Last I heard, she was working at a chain restaurant and still living in her childhood bedroom. As for my bakery, it's doing better than ever. I used some of the settlement money to expand, hired additional staff, and opened a second location. The business that they thought I should just hand over is now worth close to $500,000. I won't lie, there are nights when I wonder if I went too far. These were the people who raised me, flawed as they were. But then I remember that glass of orange juice hitting my face, the way they tried to publicly manipulate me into giving away everything I'd worked for, and how they'd stolen from me for years while making me feel like a burden. They taught me that family loyalty only goes one way, toward their benefit. So I showed them what happens when someone they underestimated decides to play by their rules. The bakery is thriving. I'm financially secure, and I've learned that sometimes the family you choose is worth more than the family you're born into. My employees have become my real family. People who respect what I've built and support my success instead of trying to take it away. Sometimes I drive past my aunt and uncle's house and see the for sale sign in the yard. They're downsizing, probably to help pay their legal bills and debts. Part of me feels a twinge of something, not quite guilt, but maybe sadness for what could have been if they just treated me with basic respect. But then I remember that 16-year-old kid who lost everything and had to rebuild from nothing, and I realized that maybe this was always how it was going to end. They saw me as someone they could use and discard when convenient. I showed them that I'm someone who fights back. The juice has long since dried, but the lesson remains. Never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Final update. It's been a year now since that family gathering, and I wanted to provide one last update on how everything played out. My uncle was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for the loan fraud. He's currently serving his time, and my aunt has been working 2 jobs to try to keep up with their mortgage payments and legal debts. They ended up having to sell their house anyway and moved into a small apartment across town. Their daughter finally found steady work, but it's at a grocery store bakery. The irony isn't lost on me. She makes about 1/10 of what my bakery generates in profit each month. As for me, I've opened a 3rd location and am considering franchising opportunities. The business that they thought I should just give away has become a legitimate success story. I've been featured in local business magazines and even got invited to speak at an entrepreneurship conference. But the most unexpected development came 6 months ago. My grandmother, who had apologized for how she treated me at that gathering, passed away and left me something in her will that shocked everyone: her house and a substantial portion of her savings. Apparently, she'd been quietly investigating what my aunt and uncle had done and was horrified by what she discovered. In her will, she wrote that she wanted to make sure I knew that not all family would betray me, and that she was proud of the man I'd become despite everything I'd been through. The house is beautiful, a Victorian-era home that's been in our family for 3 generations. I've decided to keep it and am slowly renovating it. Sometimes I sit on the front porch in the evenings and think about how different my life could have been if my aunt and uncle had just been honest and fair with me from the beginning. The extended family has largely sided with me now that the full truth has come out. My aunt and uncle have been effectively ostracized from family gatherings. The few relatives who still speak to them do so out of pity rather than respect. I've learned that revenge isn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about building something so successful that their attempts to tear you down become irrelevant. They wanted to take my bakery because they thought I didn't deserve it. Now I have 3 bakeries, a beautiful house, and the respect of my community. Every morning when I unlock the doors to my original bakery, I remember that scared 16-year-old who thought he had nothing. That kid couldn't have imagined that someday he'd be successful enough that people would try to steal from him out of jealousy. The orange juice stain came out of my shirt, but the memory of that moment, the moment I decided to stop being a victim, will stay with me forever. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay down when someone tries to keep you there. I'm not that grateful, dependent nephew anymore. I'm a business owner, a property owner, and someone who learned that family isn't about blood. It's about respect, support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. They called me a selfish betrayer for refusing to hand over my life's work. I call it self-respect.